Okay, so welcome everyone back. We are going to continue with the next session. Really quick introduction. We have with us Cornelia Dalheim, and she's a Foresight consultant and the director of and founder of the Future Impact Consulting in Cologne, in Germany. And she's been leading Foresight projects since the year 2000, which is like an eternity given the recency of the Foresight and field trendies in the industry. And she's going to be talking with us and presenting with us today a Foresight Literacy approach from Germany and talking about the Foresight Festival. So Cornelia, welcome. Thank you for joining us, and I leave this on your side.
Super, thank you so much for the introduction, and thanks to all the organizers for setting this up. It's great to be here. And yeah, as I'm aware, we're a bit behind time. I'll try to make us catch up. I'll try to be rather short in the presentation and hope that we all have a bit of time to also discuss at the end, so we can go through some questions or comments you might have. I'll also try to relate a bit to what I've seen from the summit so far. So let's see what we can manage. So I'll be speaking about a Foresight Literacy approach, which was realized with the Foresight Festival here in Germany and relates also to a Foresight process by the German Ministry for Education and Research. And before I start going into that, let me say just a few words more about us. Yes, it's been sort of an eternity, maybe, that I've been in the field. Sometimes it also feels like yesterday. I've been doing this for a while now, and the company has been around since 2015. We're now a couple of people located mostly in Cologne and Berlin also, but Eva is in Wales, for example, who was also on the team. We work mainly in Europe, sometimes beyond, with some customers, e.g. from Korea or so. And we are also very active with sharing the German node of the Millennium Project, which I do with Christian Schoen. And I'm here on behalf of the team who realized this project, which is Eva, you see in the image, Jessica, Clara, and also Michelle. So I'm speaking for a couple of them and hope I can pay them tribute properly. So what will I cover? I'll speak about a bit what I mean by Foresight Literacy, and why I use that term, we use that term, why it's maybe a thing, and what it means, and then really introduce the project to you, what we did and what were the elements that focus on Foresight Literacy, and how it was applied. And we'll then try to come to a bit of, you could say, conclusions, what we learned, what was most striking for us, and maybe what one you, others, us could take forward and maybe also implement in other comparable projects. So what's really a Foresight Literacy? Why do we need it? I'll take a step back with that one, with a chart I've created together with Geria Nerds a good while ago, maybe not an eternity, but a while ago, which tried to map, just drawing from experience of our and other consulting experts who helped me draw this up, in the field of sort of what were paradigms in Foresight, trying to make sense of how the field maybe has been changing. And if you're willing to go with an oversimplification, which of course this is, then you could say that we had different waves of how we try to make sense of the future and how to make it work, going back to the last session we saw, which talked so much about how we can really make Foresight work within organizations. And there was a wave that focused on sort of asking experts, the big Delphi wave, you could say, again, oversimplifying, of course, and sort of assuming we could bring the assumptions together from different experts and bring all their expertise together in the best way possible. And somehow there was often an association that then we could really sort of grasp the future, maybe even foresee it still. And then there was a model wave. They were all, of course, happening in parallel. But sort of a focus on calculating the future again, working with hard data and modeling all these roadmaps also that we saw and so on. Then a wave of maybe a trend focus where there were lots of trend reports and we were trying to understand the future through analyzing, mapping, detecting the trends and the weak signals and so on. And in that paper, we proclaimed, you could say, or assumed that there would be a wave of what we called open foresight at that time, which is more or less around a method mix, bringing all the different approaches together, which I think many of us do now, really working from a portfolio of approaches and methods and applying a combination of them in a hopefully wise way. But also opening these processes up, which were often closed for quite some time, although, of course, especially in the European traditions, there have been a strong focus on participatory futures also since decades, drawing from Jung and so on, and the French and Leonora Massini's work and so on. But we foresaw sort of that there would be a way to say this is such a complex environment we are in, and also it's about paying tribute to maybe the societal responsibilities, organizations that one foresight processes have, that you cannot do it alone. You, in any case, will need a mix of perspectives and also involve people in trying to make sense of the future and also hopefully getting to desirable futures and steps to make those happen. And that will be more and more realized via these open foresight approaches. And what we saw in the field, of course, happening, I feel a bit like I'm preaching to the choir here, but maybe it's still new for some, is that we saw sort of futures literacy paradigm shift in the last years. And I'll just mention it briefly to pay respect to that and mention it for those who maybe have not come across it so much. So there's been a big focus on what's called futures literacy, being more well-versed in making sense of the future, interpreting also where different assumptions come from, and dealing with it without just taking over maybe pre-formulated images and ideas around the future, which also might be there for a reason, of course. And that happens on different levels. I'm just naming, I'm sorry about those I can't mention here, a couple of initiatives which are Teach the Future, which has been working for years to bring futures thinking into schools and to teachers. And of course, many of you will know or be involved in the UNESCO Global Futures Literacy Network and its summits, which was a great one in December that I hope many of you also attended. And I'm leaving links in all these and hope to share the slides on our webpage later for those who want to check out the links. There's also a German initiative, just to raise a flag for the German stuff we're doing here, called Die Zukunftsbau, which is working on bringing futures into schools. And I know many of you here are also working on these initiatives, trying to involve many people in thinking about the future, getting the tools across and so on. And so why are we now using this term foresight literacy, actually, not futures literacy? You could debate, of course, and you can. We're using this because we've been working a lot, which relates back to what we heard before, to what we call foresight capacity building, which is supporting organizations and institutions and really building the capacity to realize foresight processes. And we're using a 3 pillars model that also draws from work I've done with many others and lots of great peace with the APF on competency model for futurists. And the 3 pillar model we are now using at Future Impacts looks at tools and approaches on the one hand, which tends to be a big focus, but also tries to put foresight mindset and culture and people and skills in about the same size of a block that you'll need to look at, and has different aspects and elements you can bring into a process in an organization in a sort of ladder way, again referring back to what we've just heard, to really step by step build competency And we're using the term foresight by trying to stress that it's about working in a structured way, drawing from the JRC and European Commission definition for foresight that has been out there for a long time, and I think has served as well to say foresight is a systematic way of analyzing the future and looking then at shaping it and taking action, doing this in a systematic and structured way. So for us, it's about really the competencies in applying and using foresight approaches that have been out there for a while and that are available, and that I think can be used more or less by anyone in different competency levels, of course. So that's the background, and maybe just to say a word about how we usually use this. This is an example from a project where we worked with Betel, which is a social sector organization, a large one, a great one, supplying services to people with disabilities also, and a big player in that. And we ran a year-long process with them, building foresight competency skills and a process really looking at their long-term futures. And it was realized very much in a hand-in-hand process. So we worked closely with them, ran a series of workshops, also involved people with disabilities, using simple language for conveying trend and strategic information, which was a challenge, but great, we thought. And that's usually how it's done. You work with an organization and try to build this capacity. But in the project I'm now trying to focus on, the question was, of course, a bit different, because we were working with and for a festival. And how do you build foresight literacy in a festival, and why would you do it? So the Foresight Festival is a German festival. It was previously called the Film Festival and has been there since 2015 and run more or less annually, I hope I'm correct, for several years. All the info's out there, also all the movies who won prizes, and many of them are in English, so have a look if you're interested in short movies about the future. And it has been there, has evolved over time, how it also worked, for example, with urban stakeholders in some of the previous processes. But for the last festival, the idea was really to do it differently and to focus way beyond looking at short films awards and involving people with that, but really broadening the scope. And then, of course, the pandemic happened. So what the festival, which is realized by Science to Public, for whom we realized this little foresight element, then I think smartly decided to do was to say, okay, we have to do the whole thing online, and we can actually broaden our scope from it. And we'll do something completely new, which wasn't done before. We'll do an academy with it. And an academy here meant that there were 8 cooperating higher education and research institutions, so universities, other research institutions, from film, from media, from all kinds of disciplines, cooperating, realizing their own research seminars, projects with students in that term, and bringing all those together to sort of also co-create the festival. The festival, which had previously also shown movies and handed out these awards and so on, but has in this version of the festival, or this edition is maybe correct to say, really focused on co-creating the festival together with the students, who realized large parts of it, from social media streams to sort of Instagram's reporting from the future, to trailers, to co-facilitating, to facilitating festival streams itself and all the elements of it. And so really taking a large part. And also drawing from some of the minor advantages that the pandemic actually had. The festival organizers decided to do actually 2 festivals, one with the Futurium, who will also speak, the House of Futures, it's called, the museum here in Berlin, and House of Futures, as it says itself, cooperating with that for one of the festivals, and also the ministry and its large-scale foresight processes that I'll say a bit more about. So it was really broadening its scope and bringing all these partners together. And the question was, okay, how can we then really bring this idea of foresight into this group without, it's not a festival with a massive budget. How can we do that in a smart way and really bring people in touch and enable them to use Foresight somehow? And how do we do that? And we created 4 pillars that we worked with. One was input, so a lecture in the lecture series introducing Foresight and providing sort of lots of link lists, further reading, then having an open doors sort of office hours, we call it Sprechstunden in German, where you could just walk in, ask a futurist about anything, about the methodologies, about a process maybe you are setting up. And then creating toolkits, which I know has been around with many of colleagues' initiatives also. So how can people use these approaches themselves? And then lastly, and I think maybe most importantly also, create elements of interaction and co-creation using Foresight approaches with open workshops that were run, one on a trend expedition and the last one on what we call the scenario DIY, so do yourself scenarios in a very quick and cooperative fashion. And what's also specific about this project is that it not only was supported by the German Ministry of Education and Research, but it also connected very closely through its to its Foresight process, which is a currently running multi-annual, multi-year and multi-level, you could say, large-scale Foresight process. I think many of you have followed this over the years. That has started, I think, last year, correct, and includes a big regular scanning process, then a prioritization of topics, scenario projects, then diving deeper into different fields, and it's realized by what's called the Zukunftsbüro, which is Zeitpunkt and Prognos realizing that, and is supported by an expert circle called the Zukunftskreis, the Future Circle, which I'm co-chairing together with Armin Grunwald. There's more info also here in what I've linked. Also increasingly in English, look out for it. Sometimes it's a bit hidden, but it's there. And it has produced at the time that the festival went out also these scanning results, which were called future topic sheets, and scenarios and lots of research on the future values, which was also produced in a sort of participatory fashion where people were able to contribute, to join surveys, to also join focus groups and workshops also with the youth and so on. And the aim was to really connect those two streams. So there's this large scale ministry Foresight process, which also supported this festival, which is run by a non-profit, which then set up this academy. And our aim was to really make connections as far as we could across the streams of Foresight literacy that we put in place. And so what we did is we introduced this project and also its outputs. So these future topic sheets in the lecture at the beginning, and also the research on future values. Then in the support, again, supported people who worked with these contents. For example, there was an Instagram channel that students set up, which used this future values report to report in short stories about the future in Insta, chunk size, small size, elements of stories, and interacted with people on Instagram very nicely about it. And we supported those a bit. Then we put out the toolkits, which enabled people to build scenarios themselves, to start trend scanning and trend spotting by themselves, provide them with templates and how-tos and introduction and further literature. And then again, we used the outcomes from the ministry process in the workshops that we set up, and also brought in experts from the expert circle to support in the jury, but also in the festival events, so to make a personal connection from this large-scale Foresight process into this festival that was realized together with the students. And maybe to say a bit more about the toolkits, which are in German so far, I'm sorry, but we're trying to hopefully also make them soon happen in English. And I know many are interested when we share them, so say a bit more about these. The toolkits are really trying to be very low barrier, very accessible. So for the scientists among us, it's not pure science or pure research. It's really trying to make the tools and principles accessible. So what we try to cut across these elements is to focus on some key Foresight literacy, Foresight principles. and repeat those, make these accessible, apply them in practice, and thereby bring those principles into use and into the diffusion across the festival and the academy with the different institutions. And that was, for example, really thinking about always alternative futures in the plural, the 360-degree views, using STEEP, using all these mapping principles of looking all across you, also in areas where maybe you are not so much looking for change so far, questioning assumptions and the underlying beliefs that you maybe have and that other stakeholders have, and all these, cutting these across the lecture, the support that we did, and the toolkits, and then the workshops also. And the toolkits as such really make two, you could say, building blocks of methodologies in Foresight accessible. That's trend scanning, identifying trends, making sense of trends, thinking about how they could develop in the future, and how you could describe them, make sense of them. And secondly, building scenarios where we used a combination of the 2x2 matrix, this sort of what's often called the GBN principle, and a more detailed key factor-based elaborate scenario methodology, bringing those two together in a very accessible format. And it has templates you can use, blank ones, those with explanations. It has links to more literature if you want to go deeper, and really walks people through step by step how they can use these methodologies. And we heard in the process that many actually did use these and applied them, used them in workshops and maybe organizational processes. Even some people were involved from that side of the perspective in the festival process. And then what we did is we also offered these open workshops, which of course is not revolutionary or rocket science, but was done. And I think done in a very nice way in the course of the festival. So the festival, which you usually associate, okay, you would be shown these short films that will then hopefully win an award, some of them. But these were also festivals which were very interactive, and thereby again drew from some of the advantages of the pandemic conditions. And these were very short, 1 hour each. And I remember some of my colleagues from the Foresight scene saying, this is not possible to do it. Well, it was done. One focusing on a trend expedition, so really people walking on future of energy was the topic then, and then scenario DIY, where we focused on circular economies. And it really broke down the content we had from the ministry process into very manageable chunks, you could say, bringing people together, focusing the majority of the time of them really applying just the tools, walking them through it, making it very easy for them to do so. And people came together, surprisingly, from ages 18 to 70, so a very broad range from very different backgrounds, retirees, some students, some professionals, as I said, coming from organizations. And it just plain worked very well to introduce them to these materials and have them work with them. So what have we learned? Again, referring to some of the notions that we came across when we were planning this on what is doable or what is not doable. Like to stress that for some of you may be clear, but not for everyone, I guess, in the field, that yes, you can do a trend analysis or scenario workshop in an hour online with people who have not met from all kinds of age groups and backgrounds, and in the end arrived with all the groups who were involved at trend overviews, a list of trends and what they mean and what they could mean and why and how they see it differently, or even scenario drafts in alternatives, describing and mapping out different futures. And it's actually not that much to do. It's very doable. The online format, of course, made it easier for people to join who did not have to travel and access this content and opportunity. And I'd encourage anyone to also use these approaches to open a door. And this brings us to what I'd like to stress in terms of learnings, what we learned in the festival process and what maybe also others might want to use, or I would like to encourage others to use, or encourage ourselves if we are able to join in again in the festival. So for us, the open doors was actually a key lever. These open office hours where just anybody could basically call us with all kinds of questions around Foresight and what they were trying to do with the information and tools we provided, and get our hands-on help, and us then sharing other information or maybe joining forces with them for some steps to make sure all the students could work with that material and make it doable for them, maybe connect them to some other people and so on. So this open doors, I think, is something that is not a lot of effort, and we could all do well when we do these kinds of projects of capacity and building and literacy building. And then the low barriers, as I said, really worked very well. And can be very helpful, integrating also sort of a more playful approach. We called it a trend expedition and not a trend analysis introduction or so. A little bit of gaming elements we introduced. We discussed those yesterday also in the summit. I think a key learning for us was really that, of course, we cannot get across all the breadth of the information and all the tools that are out there, and a lot of scientific maybe differentiation of which methodology for what and how, what is all the details of what you would need to know, for example, about scenario methodologies and the different ones and which one would you apply when. That's not what you're trying to achieve. And the focus of some of the key Foresight principles really worked well for us, because we realized people picked up on them and built on them and started playing with them and reflecting on them. And that actually was more helpful to then say, okay, and here's more information. Some people who wanted to dive deeper can, but otherwise we're really focusing on getting some of these key principles across. So to promote a conjunction of a hands-on Foresight literacy approach with the larger national or supranational, even research-based Foresight projects, I think is something that's very well doable and opens the door again to another kind of working with these insights and integrating people, involving people, enabling people to join forces in these projects. And then I think this cooperative festival and academy principle was really special here, and is something that could be repeated in other contexts also. So the co-creation for, by, and with the students' teams really worked very well, and I think brought a lot of people into the connection of really what we can do with Foresight. And many said in the feedback they gave that they want to keep working with Foresight and future thinking in their work, wherever their background may be, whether they came from media studies or politics or whatever it was. So I think maybe to leave just those few conclusions with you, and then let's see if you have any questions or comments or something maybe to share from your own projects, which would be great to hear.
Hello, Cornelia. Yes, I'm gonna put this in this mode for you. So you can see now the screen and you can see yourself, I believe. You have a few questions in here, so I'm gonna put them for you in the screen. Let me know if you're able to see it.
Yes, there's something. Great. Okay. Foresight anxiety. Okay. Prashant, I think. Great question. So is everybody seeing the question actually, or should I repeat it?
Yes, everyone is seeing the question.
Okay, yeah. So I think it's a great question. What we set from the beginning is the principle of what we would try to convey and how we would try to approach this enabling process is to stress very much something which I've heard across the summit. I think also, Miguel, in what you mentioned in the session before, is this principle of anticipatory thinking is something that we all do anyways. So that's something we kept repeating and showing also to people, that it is actually a function we all have in our thinking, in our everyday life. So we were conveying that is something we are doing in parts already, and that there's a wealth of tools which can enable you to do it in a more structured way. And that actually helped a lot. People kept also referring to that, to say, it was great for me to become aware that, yes, of course, I am doing that. when I walk out the door, I go out with an assumption about how the day goes and maybe thinking through alternatives or what could happen. So I'm doing that already. And that helped a lot. And then really breaking it down into very manageable chunks. So I flagged it's not the hardcore science of what we put in the toolkits, and it takes a bit of courage, I think, to simplify and leave lots of stuff out, and then just put a bit annex is how we solved it. Say for those who have more time, you can look here and there and there and there and there, and go deeper. But to break it down and make it very accessible, so that worked well, I think.
Okay, we have another question from Derek about how can you do the Kant in under 1 hour?
Yeah, that was, we were wondering too. What we did is we set up, we shared a bit of content before from the process, so they had some inspiration, and we did a 5-minute introduction and then walked them through an identification process. So the first was crowdsourced, so that everybody was able to contribute on a whiteboard-based thing like a mirror or so. To just throw in ideas, and we were structuring on the go with them so that people could just very easily throw in ideas about the topic we were scanning for, which was futures of energy. And that led us with the 20 participants we had in the scan. We had also shared the question before, which helped, by the way, to easily at the beginning already like 40, 50 scanning hits actually. And then we split those up in groups, and they then worked on a manageable number of those scanning hits or trends they identified and went deeper into them. So I think it was a smart combination of having a crowd-based approach at the moment, just more like a brainwriting, to just get all the stuff that people could think of and that they found for those who prepared on a big board. And then break that down and have people think deeper about just a select group of aspects. And the stimulus we provided was some scanning from the ministry process. So this was 1-page sheets, and we selected just 2 sheets, so make it very easy for people to start thinking about those issues.
Okay, so we are going to get the last question from Michael, which reads like this.
Hi, Michael.
You know everyone.
Nice. These two. That's nice. Nice to see you all. So why is the ministry actually supporting this? So I think it's support. You asked the ministry, but I'm pretty sure I can more or less answer as far as I know. They also participated. Yes, they joined the festival, and yes, they are looking at sort of what happens in there and utilize those approaches. But the overall idea is really make the idea around foresight, make that more participatory, reach a broader audience, involve groups of people which maybe usually would not hear so much about this research-based foresight process, or join a survey or join a focus group, but just reach a different kind of audience and communicate science and also science outputs and connect scientists and the wider public.
Okay, Cornelia, so let me go like this. Thank you so much. We are going to wrap the presentation. You have a lot of shout outs in there, also from Greece, from Nandas, and a lot of friends came to see you. So we are going to wrap up here, and we are moving now to the next session with Mary Conway. So thank you so much, Cornelia.
Thank you to all.
Everyone else, just keep on the page. It will reload automatically into the next session. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Miguel. Thanks, everyone.